Before we begin tonight, I want you to do something for me. Close your eyes. Take a breath. Now listen. Hear that? That distant hum underneath everything? The kind of background noise your brain learned to ignore years ago. The sound of electricity moving through the walls. The micro-tremors of your building settling against itself. Your own pulse pushing blood past eardrums. We spend our entire lives inside a cocoon of sound. And here's the terrifying part. We trust it completely. We use sound to orient ourselves, to measure distance, to feel safe. Sound tells us what's nearby, what's moving, what's alive, and what wants us. But what if something out there understood that? What if something ancient, older than language, older than memory, had learned to use that trust as a weapon? What if the sound you were hunting was already hunting you back? Welcome to Unquiet Corners. I'm Alex Vane. Tonight's episode is called Dead Frequency, and I'll warn you now, by the time this story ends, you may never put on a pair of headphones in the dark quite the same way again. Let's begin.
On a biting December night along the mountain highways of Oregon, the fog doesn't just settle, it devours. It rolls down from the Cascades in slow, patient waves, swallowing the white dividing lines, erasing the guardrails, turning the world beyond your headlights into an infinite, featureless gray. These are the kinds of roads where you start to feel like the only person left on Earth. And somewhere along one of those roads, a 2-lane stretch carved into the pine-covered hills outside a tiny, half-forgotten town called Silver Lining Creek, a battered old Ford pickup was pushing through the dark. Behind the wheel sat Jen, 26 years old, 5'4". She had dark circles under her eyes from too many consecutive late nights and a thermos of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. She was a sound designer, and a genuinely gifted one. For 3 years, she'd been crafting the audio architectures that made audiences white-knuckle their armrests in some of Hollywood's biggest horror releases. Every creak, every layered whisper, every precisely timed shriek that made your neck hair stand up, that was Jen's work. She understood fear from the inside out.
She built it professionally, surgically, with the precision of someone who knew exactly which frequencies the human nervous system cannot ignore. But lately, nothing was coming. The industry had a clinical name for it, creative block. Jen had a different name for it. She called it the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind. The kind where you sit in front of a $50,000 studio setup with your best reference headphones clamped over your ears, and all you hear is your own breathing. For months, every sound she produced had felt hollow, derivative. She was recycling, pulling stock effects from her library, layering the same tired frequency bands, hitting the same emotional beats she'd already hit 100 times. Her last 2 projects had gotten polite notes from the director. The word uninspired had appeared in one email. She deleted it immediately, but it had lodged itself behind her eyes like a splinter she couldn't reach. She needed something real, something raw, a sound she had never heard before. Something that hadn't been processed, compressed, sampled, and scraped clean of everything that made it alive. That's what brought her to Oregon.
The plan was simple. Rent a remote cabin, spend a week in the old-growth forest, and capture genuine, unprocessed natural audio at altitude. Pine forests up here produced sounds no studio library had ever replicated. The specific resonance of century-old trees and wind, the acoustic behavior of dense winter fog over undergrowth, the precise quality of the silence that falls between bird calls in a space where humans almost never set foot. For a sound designer, it was the equivalent of a painter going into the wilderness to study how real light actually behaves. She'd found a listing online, almost by accident. Whispering Pines Cabin. 1 bedroom, no Wi-Fi, no cell service past mile marker 9. Cheap, available, perfect. It was just past 1 in the morning when she finally pulled up in front of the cabin. The headlights swept across a small, dark wooden structure half swallowed by Douglas fir trees. As she killed the engine, the silence of the forest rushed in to replace the road noise, dense and immediate, and somehow too complete. She stepped out into air so cold it stung the inside of her nose.
The pines made a sound in the wind, a long, low whistle threading through the branches. Not quite music, not quite language. Something uneasily between the two. But standing there, with the tree line pressing in close on 3 sides, and that low whistling wind threading through the branches above her, something pulled at the back of her mind. Something vague, wordless. She ignored it. She was tired. She had work to do. The next day, Jen was up before dawn. She loaded her recording rig into a canvas field backpack, her professional boom microphone on its collapsible stand, her high-end portable recorder, her studio reference headphones, a full set of spare batteries, and a battered field notebook where she logged the acoustic properties of each location. This was her process, methodical, precise. She spent the morning moving through the forest in a slow grid pattern, capturing everything she could find. The papery crinkle of dry pine needles underfoot, the staccato percussion of a woodpecker working a dead tree 300 yards off, the way sound bent differently in clearings versus under heavy canopy.
By mid-afternoon, she had 3 hours of raw audio that genuinely excited her for the first time in months. There was a depth to it, a 3-dimensional spaciousness that no library sound could replicate. You had to be here. You had to listen. She hiked back to the cabin just before sunset, cooked a simple meal, made coffee, and settled at the small table near the fireplace with her laptop and headphones. It was just past 2 in the morning when she found it. She was moving through her audio files chronologically. Standard workflow, nothing unusual. Scrubbing through each track, marking clean, usable sections, flagging anything with extraneous noise for removal. Routine editing, almost meditative in its familiarity. Then she reached the file tagged 4:12 p.m. It was a clip she'd recorded in the deepest part of the forest, a particularly dense stand of old-growth trees about a mile from the cabin. She remembered the specific spot. She remembered the particular quality of the stillness there, how the air had felt somehow thicker than the surrounding forest. Heavier. She hit play.
For the first 40 seconds, everything was exactly what it should have been. Wind through canopy, a faint rustling overhead, normal, clean. Then it appeared, a sound that didn't belong. It was metallic, precisely patterned. It oscillated in a frequency that sat at the exact edge of human perception. The kind of frequency you feel more than hear, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a faint vibration in the back teeth. Jen immediately pulled the track into her equalizer and stripped away the ambient noise, isolating the anomaly. She stared at her screen. Every sound has a signature, a visual shape on a waveform display that tells you what generated it. Wind looks like a gentle rolling curve, a branch snapping as a spike. Human voices are complex, organic, beautifully irregular. The waveform on her screen was none of those things. It was triangular, perfectly, geometrically triangular, repeating in precise mechanical intervals, as if someone had drawn the pattern with a ruler and a protractor. After years of professional audio work, Jen had never seen a naturally occurring sound produce a waveform like that. It wasn't possible. Sound waves don't behave that way in nature, not without a machine generating them. She boosted the high frequency range, and she heard it. Weeping. The unmistakable, broken sound of a human being in deep distress, buried underneath the mechanical oscillation like a voice trapped beneath ice. Jen pulled the headphones off and set them on the table. She was a professional. She dealt in audio every single day. She knew the 1,000 ways recording artifacts could create false impressions, how wind across a microphone diaphragm could approximate a voice, how certain animal vocalizations processed at the wrong speed could pass for human tones. She wasn't a person who scared easily. She'd spent years making other people scared for a living. But this wasn't that. She'd been in enough studios with enough high-end equipment for long enough. She knew what she'd just heard. That was a human voice. Embedded in a recording made at 4:12 p.m. this afternoon,
in a part of the forest where no living person had been anywhere near her microphone. No cell towers within 12 miles. No radio transmitters anywhere in the area. No plausible source.
She put the headphones back on and listened one more time. The mechanical drone throbbed. The invisible weeping rose beneath it like a tide. She closed the laptop. She went to bed. But the sound didn't follow her to sleep so much as it was already waiting there. Day 2. Jen woke up having already made her decision. She was a sound designer. Whatever had produced that geometrically precise waveform and that buried human voice, she was going to record it properly, deliberately, with full equipment. Maybe it was infrasound, a naturally occurring low-frequency phenomenon generated by geology or wind patterns she'd never encountered. Maybe there was a perfectly rational explanation. There usually was. But she was going back regardless. She reached the stand of old-growth trees just after 3 in the afternoon. She recognized the spot immediately. Something about the particular quality of the light there, the way the air behaved, the distinctive character of the silence. She set up her boom mic on its full extended stand, angled toward the densest part of the trees, connected it to a recorder, put on her headphones, and settled in to wait.
For 5 minutes, nothing. Just forest. Normal, quiet, indifferent forest. 10 minutes. 15. At precisely 4:12 p.m., the headphones screamed. Not a sound, a force, a wall of high-frequency feedback that hit her eardrums like 2 sharp spikes driven in simultaneously. She ripped the headphones off and pressed her palms to the sides of her head, eyes watering. When the worst of it subsided, she noticed 2 things simultaneously. First, despite the near-freezing temperature, she was sweating. Not nervous perspiration, a strange full-body cold sweat, like her skin was reacting to something the air was carrying that had nothing to do with heat. Second, the forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling, nothing. The branches above her were motionless. The fog between the trunks had thickened and dropped, pooling at knee height, absolutely still, as if the air itself had stopped moving. She slowly raised the headphones back toward her ears. The screaming frequency was gone. In its place, a whisper, clear, close, deliberate, placed directly in her ear as if someone were standing 4 inches away. Jen, turn around. Her entire body froze, not from cold, from something deeper and older than cold, something animal and instinctual that bypassed every rational framework she had and landed, fully formed, in the part of her brain that only activates when it knows it is in danger. Her name. That voice had said her name. There was no one in this forest who knew her name. There was no one in this forest. The microphone was pointed at an empty clearing. There was nothing in front of it but fog and trees and dead air. And yet the voice had come through the headphone speaker, which meant it had come through the microphone, which meant something had been standing directly in front of her microphone and speaking into it. She turned. The clearing behind her was empty, but at the edge of the tree line, standing in the gap between 2 massive moss-covered Douglas firs, she saw it. It had the approximate outline of a human being, but no specific definition, no edges, no substance. It was not so much a thing as it was an absence, a place where the air had drawn itself into a slow vertical spiral, and in doing so had begun to pull the light inward.
The pale winter light, the wisps of fog, the muted gray of the afternoon sky, it was absorbing all of it, consuming it, as though the space it occupied was a drain. And as she stared at it, she had the absolute bone-deep certainty that it was looking back at her. She ran. She left everything behind. $3,000 of professional recording equipment abandoned in the middle of a forest 12 miles from the nearest road. She didn't stop running until the cabin door was shut and bolted and chained behind her. She moved through every room, checking windows, throwing every latch she could find. Her phone had exactly the signal she'd expected, 0. She needed to leave, pack her things, get in the truck, drive until she hit a cell signal. Simple. Just stop shaking long enough to...
The laptop opened itself. She was standing 6 feet away from it, and she watched it happen. The screen came alive, painting a pale blue rectangle across the cabin wall. Her audio editing software launched without a single keystroke. A project file populated the timeline on its own. A file she had no memory of creating. The laptop opened itself. She was standing 6 feet away from it, and she watched it happen. The screen came alive, painting a pale blue rectangle across the cabin wall. Her audio editing software launched without a single keystroke. A project file populated the timeline on its own. A file she had no memory of creating.
And at the top of the timeline, a single new audio track she had absolutely not recorded. It began to play. No, please. Let me go. Please. It was her voice, her exact voice, every vocal quality, every inflection, every specific imperfection of her speech, coming out of the laptop speakers loud enough to fill the cabin. Jen had never recorded those words, never. She would have remembered. That wasn't the kind of thing you forgot. She grabbed the edge of the table. The voice in the recording was saturated with a specific kind of terror that she recognized with professional certainty. She had studied human fear responses for years. She had analyzed thousands of hours of genuine, unfiltered human audio. She knew exactly what maximum intensity distress sounded like. She was listening to herself, experiencing it, and she had no memory of it existing. Every light in the cabin died at once. Outside, the wind had come up fast and violent. Lightning strobed through the window glass in sharp white bursts. The storm that had been building all day broke without warning, and the rain on the metal roof went from silence to an overwhelming roar in under 30 seconds. But even over the storm, the laptop played on, and now the sound was changing. Her voice began to come apart. The clean human tone she'd recognized started shredding and multiplying. 4 voices, 8, 20, all speaking in the same cadence at slightly different pitches, layering over each other until there was no individual voice left, just a mechanical, industrial resonance. The sound of something that had absorbed enough human voices to approximate language but had no use for being human. The temperature plummeted, not gradually, in a single precipitous drop that turned Jen's exhale into a thick white cloud. And then the sound began to move. Not from the laptop anymore, from the left corner of the room, then the ceiling directly above her, then the back wall behind the fireplace, then somewhere inches from her right ear. It circled her in the dark with patient, deliberate purpose, filling the cabin with its layered mechanical resonance until she couldn't tell where the walls ended and the sound began. She pressed her hands over her ears. It didn't help. She could feel it beneath hearing. A vibration that lived in her teeth, in her chest cavity, in the fluid of her inner ear canals. It was generating a pressure that had nothing to do with acoustics and everything to do with something older. A pain spiked behind her eardrums. Then something warm began to run down the side of her neck. She pressed her fingers to her ear. When she pulled them away in the next lightning flash, they were dark. The circling stopped. You came here chasing sounds, Jen. We are the sounds this forest swallowed. Every cry, every scream, every last sound a human being made in this place before the silence took them. And now, we want yours. The darkness in the far corner of the cabin began to move, not like a shadow, not like a shape that holds its edges. It moved the way deep water moves when it finds a crack in a wall. A slow, spreading liquid expansion that pressed itself across the floorboards, displacing the fragments of lightning light that strobed back every few seconds. No face, no limbs, no definition. Just patient, widening darkness. And as it came closer, the vibration it carried intensified. The air compressed inward. Sound was being forced into frequencies that attacked her skull from every direction simultaneously. First as pressure, then as pain, then as something she had no clinical name for. A sensation like being unmade, like her edges were dissolving.
She was running out of time. She understood this with a clarity that bypassed panic entirely and arrived somewhere colder and more useful. She was a sound designer. She understood exactly what sound was, what it was made of, how it behaved. And there was one principle every audio engineer knew from the first week of their training, so fundamental that it was almost boring, that she had never once imagined she would need in this way. Every sound wave has an opposite. Generate a perfect inversion of any sound, identical in frequency and amplitude but flipped in phase, and the two waves annihilate each other. They collide and cancel completely. Engineers called it phase inversion. It was the principle behind every noise-canceling device in the world. The sound trying to dissolve her was still a sound. That meant it still had a frequency. That meant it still had an opposite. On the table behind her, she'd been working from it the night before, sat her professional studio mixing board. Battery-powered, she didn't need the cabin's electricity. Connected to it, a large diaphragm condenser microphone and a high-frequency audio amplifier capable of generating phase-inverted signal output across a wide frequency band.
She moved backward in the dark, hands behind her, feeling along the table surface until her fingers found the mixer's cold metal housing. Real, solid, hers. The dark liquid mass was close now. She could feel the vibration of it against her back, and the pain in her ears had spiked to the edge of her ability to remain conscious. Her vision was narrowing. Her fingers found the condenser mic's cable, followed it to the mic body, brought it around in front of her face. Her other hand found the master power switch. The entity closed the last of the distance. Jen opened her mouth and screamed. The phase-inverted counterwave struck the entity's vibration field at its exact inverse frequency. The result wasn't a sound. It was the opposite of a sound. An anti-wave that didn't make noise, but unmade it. In the moment it struck, the cabin experienced a concussive pressure release so severe that every single window blew outward simultaneously. The liquid darkness convulsed. Then it dispersed. Not retreating, not fleeing, coming apart. The way fog comes apart when light finally hits it at the right angle. One moment it was there. The next moment, the air was just air again.
The temperature of the cabin rose almost instantly. The vibration vanished. The mechanical resonance that had been wrapping itself around her consciousness for the past 20 minutes ended in a single instant, as complete and final as a circuit breaking. Outside, rain fell in straight lines through the broken window frames, and the forest was quiet. Absolutely, purely, cleanly quiet. Jen's legs gave out. She went down on her knees on the cold floorboards, hands still gripping the condenser mic, ears ringing with a silence that had a different quality than any silence she had ever recorded. She stayed there until her heartbeat slowed, until her hands stopped shaking, until the darkness behind her closed eyes stopped moving. Then she lay down on the floor, and she slept. When the Silver Lining Creek sheriff arrived at the cabin the following morning, the blown-out windows stopped him cold on the porch. He went inside. He found Jen on the floor, unconscious. A thin, dried line of blood tracing from her right ear down the line of her jaw. Her pulse was strong. Her breathing was regular. Her expression, even unconscious, looked like a person who had been to the exact outer edge of something and had come back from it, knowing with absolute precision what that edge was made of. He called an ambulance. She was taken to the local hospital. She woke up 12 hours later in a hospital room in Silver Lining Creek, to the sound of monitors beeping and the distant murmur of a TV in another room. She lay there for a long time before she moved, just listening. Her hearing was intact. 3 weeks later, Jen was back in New York. She sat at her workstation in a recording studio in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by the best equipment money could rent. And she did something no one who'd heard her story expected her to do. She opened the Oregon recordings, all of them, including the ones from 4:12 p.m. She did not delete them. She sat with them for 2 weeks straight, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. She worked. What she made after those 2 weeks was a 40-minute psychoacoustic music album. She called it The Silence of Oregon. When it was released, it did something unusual. Listeners reported a strange dual response.
The undeniable physical sensation of raised hair, elevated heartbeat, the skin-crawling alertness that comes when your body knows something your mind can't name.
And simultaneously, underneath all of that, a stillness, a deep, odd calm that listeners struggled to put into words. Like standing at the edge of something vast and realizing the vastness wasn't hostile, just very, very old. The album found its audience slowly at first, then all at once, spreading by word of mouth, then by recommendation, then by the kind of quiet, persistent cultural traction that only certain works achieve when they reach something real in the people who encounter them. Within a year, The Silence of Oregon had been streamed over 40 million times. Jen got the success she'd been reaching for all those years, but she never went back. Not to Silver Lining Creek. Not to the Whispering Pines cabin. Not to that stand of old-growth trees off the deep end of a forest road. She accepted certain field recording invitations with a quiet, firm no, and did not explain why. She understood now that some sounds exist for a reason that has nothing to do with human ears. That certain frequencies in certain places have been accumulating for longer than human language has existed. Building in the spaces between old trees, in the resonance of cold stone.
In the precise quality of silence that falls at 4:12 p.m. on a winter afternoon in a forest that has seen things come and go. And some things that live inside those frequencies do not appreciate being found.
You're still listening. Jen was a person who built silence for a living, who understood its components, its textures, its architecture better than almost anyone alive. And even she was afraid of it, in the end. Not of the silence itself, of what the silence contained. Because here's what this story is actually about. Not the entity, not the forest, not the specific frequencies living in the dark of the Oregon wilderness. It's about what happens when we go looking for something raw, something real. And we find something that was never meant to be found. Something that has been waiting there in the space between sounds, patient as geology. Most of us never go to a remote forest at midnight with a boom microphone. Most of us are safe from the specific thing that found Jen in those woods. But we all have a version of that forest, don't we? This has been Dead Frequency. You've been listening to Unquiet Corners. I'm Alex Vane. Until next time, leave your headphones on.
But maybe don't listen too hard to what's underneath the silence. What if something is already listening back?